Ms. Miles, the first question goes to you. And what recommendations do you have for the state to pay past due bills, pensions, interest on debt, as well as funding for education and human and social services if the temporary income tax is not renewed?
Well, there's a lot that we can do, and I am, as most people know, not a proponent of renewing the state income tax. It was a temporary tax that was promised to be rolled back. But we do have a lot we can do to cut our spending. We made an additional $31 billion in revenue from the temporary tax increase, but we only paid our backlog of bills down $3 billion. We were told that that tax increase was going to pay those off, and obviously that's not how the money was used. I think we need to focus in this state on the two biggest budget items that we have. Those are pensions and Medicaid. Medicaid was supposed to be a poverty program. Medicaid was supposed to be a program that took care of people who had no other way to get health care. But Medicaid has been expanded in this state so that now up to 1/3 of all citizens in Illinois are going to be eligible for it. That's just not the kind of system we designed when Medicaid was created. Medicaid was supposed to be a safety net. Pensions, 70 cents of every new education dollar goes to pensions. And we need to focus on structuring a system so that education dollars go to the schools. We need to scrub Medicaid rolls to be sure that only people who are eligible receive those benefits, and we need to restructure pensions to make sure our retirees are secure in their retirements.
Can you repeat the question, please?
Question was, what recommendations do you have for the state to pay past due bills if the temporary income tax? No, I have that. If the pension reform bill is found unconstitutional.
No, it was the last one. We had the right to the last one.
Okay, I'm sorry.
I'm like, that second one doesn't sound right. But now we know it's coming.
Okay.
So as a first-term legislature and a member of an appropriations committee, I went down to Springfield 2 years ago thinking we have this temporary income tax in place and it needs to expire like we were told it was supposed to expire. But now I see where our budget is going and where our funding needs sit. And I feel that if we just set a date to expire the tax, we're going to find ourselves in a heap of trouble. We have made progress. We have paid down our backlog of unpaid bills. We were at $9.1 billion a few years ago, and now we're at, I believe, $4.4 billion, and at 2.2 we're at a 30-day cycle. So those bills are being paid down. We need to make sure that we have the money in place to finance things like education, our human services, our services for seniors. And my fear is if we just arbitrarily roll the tax back without putting anything in its place, we're going to fall back to where we were a few years ago. What I would like to do is look at what other states have done, like Missouri, for example. They've put economic indicators into their budgets, so when their economy hits a certain level, their taxes actually went back. And this looks at income, it looks at employment, and that to me looks like a more responsible way to roll back the tax so we can keep our services intact.
Okay. So we will go on to pension reform. If the pension reform bill is found unconstitutional, what specific things would you want in a new bill to solve the problem?
If the court does find the bill unconstitutional, my hope is they'll give us a roadmap, because the way we passed the legislation pretty much passed it in segments and parts. So my hope would be the court would say, you can go ahead and do this part, but you can't do this, but here's a solution. Because we really need to fix this problem. It's a problem that has been brewing for years and years and years. And we finally got to the point where we said, we're not going to let this happen anymore. We've got to get something done. We have to make sure that the pension is there for people to rely on when they retire. And in order to make it sustainable, we do have to make some changes. So the goal would be, when the court does come back with its decision, that we would be able to use that as a roadmap to start moving forward and keep the discussions going. We can't, if the court, again, rules it down, we can't just let it sit. We have to keep the momentum going because our state just can't afford any more crisis.
I think it's likely that the law will be found unconstitutional. I agree with Ms. Fine that we'll need to look at what the court says in terms of what we can do going forward. But this pension system was established at a time when people lived to be about 67 years old. So they retired when they were 57. They received their pension for 10 years, and then the state was done. And fortunately now, people are living much longer. We need to take a big step back and start looking at the assumptions that underlie our current pension system so that we can build a system that is based in reality in terms of what our lives are like now. So I would be in favor of stepping back and creating defined contribution plans instead of defined benefit plans. We need to keep the promises that we've made to people who are at or near retirement, and so we need to be sure that our system continues to be viable to pay those pensions. But we need to start making promises to our current workers that we can keep going forward. A defined contribution plan, which a lot of us in the private sector participate in the form of a 401k, for example, will give our retirees flexibility, portability, and most importantly, dependability, because we all know that when Springfield gets its hands on our money, they don't always do with it what they say they will. So I'd like to see us reform the system completely so that we can keep our current promises and make new ones that we're going to be able to keep.
Thank you. Let's just change topics a little bit. In this next election, we have an advisory referendum which would create the Women's Health Referendum Act and ask whether any health insurance plan in Illinois that provides prescription drug coverage should be required to include prescription birth control as part of that coverage. Your opinion on that, Ms. Myalls?
My opinion on that is that the less we mandate, the better we do, because competition drives what our insurance companies and our employers offer. I'm not in favor of creating more mandates from the government in terms of what we need to provide to anybody by way of health care. By way of healthcare or specific drugs, because I think when we let the free market decide what's going to be offered, the market does a very good job. And I think the more the government gets involved in starting to define what's appropriate and what's not appropriate, the more we run the risk of programs that don't make sense for the constituencies that are involved.
I think it's baffling that here we are in 2014, decades after Roe versus Wade, and this is still an issue. I believe that women should be provided with birth control. Many women are on birth control for other reasons than birth control, for many other health issues. It could be migraines, it could be something else. And I don't think it's up to corporations to decide whether or not they're going to cover a medication that our doctor feels is important for a woman to have.
Thank you. Ms. Fine, do you believe our criminal justice system needs reforming, and what reforms would you support?
Our criminal justice system definitely needs reforming. If you look at our prison population, it's overcrowded and overwhelming. Toni Preckwinkle once said that she gave somebody a tour of the prison population in Cook County, and they said to her, okay, and now where's the white prison? And what we're finding is a big issue having to do with economics, and people who are in prison for maybe small amounts of drug possession can't bail out. And so we as the taxpayer are paying to keep them in prison, and they cannot get out of prison, support their families, go back to work. So we have to look at what programs can work. There was one piece of legislation that we passed this year that would help many people get back to work, and it was called Ban the Box. And what this says is if you are applying for a particular job, on your application, there can no longer be a box for you to check off that asks you if you've been convicted of a crime. That question can be asked in the interview process. I had a gentleman come to my office one day and say to me, I have a son who's 30 years old and has his CPA and a master's, but because he has to check that box on the top of his application, he can't get a job. He did something very stupid when he was 18 years old, and he's paid for that already. And we want him to be able to be somebody who can contribute to society, not take from society.
Thank you.
Can you read the question again, please?
Sure. Do you believe our criminal justice system needs reforming, and what would you support?
I do believe our criminal justice system needs reforming. We need to create a system that allows cases to move more quickly through the system so that there can be resolution of pending criminal cases and get rid of some of the backlog in our courts. I'm baffled by the idea, though, that corporations and employers aren't allowed to ask questions about whether people have been convicted of crimes before they're obligated to invest resources in interviewing and hiring people who come to their office. There are people who haven't committed crimes that can't get jobs. And I think that we should leave it to employers to decide what's a fair basis for including or excluding somebody from their employee pool. But more importantly than that, I think we need to have a prison system that's fair. I think we need to have a system that is not set up to fail by having facilities that can't accommodate the people who are coming through the system. The fact that the jails are overcrowded should be an indication that we're doing a good job reducing crime, and the truth is that is part of what it's indicating, that we are getting criminals off the street, that we are putting them in prisons, and that we're creating a system that will hopefully create some rehabilitation for them. And I think any reform needs to be focused on those rehabilitative efforts as well, while people are paying the price for the crimes they committed.
Thank you. Let's talk about campaign finance reform and elections. What measures would you recommend for mandatory disclosure of the sources of funds used by nonprofits to purchase advertisements about candidates? Ms. Myalls?
Can you read the last part of that again?
Sure. What measures would you recommend for mandatory disclosure of the source of funds used by nonprofits to purchase advertisements about candidates?
I am a professor of communications law at DePaul University, and election law is a subject that we teach there, and this question was one that my students found particularly interesting as we discussed it. Disclosure laws are important because we do want to know who's spending money, but they've turned into a weapon against the people who are spending it. The CEO of Mozilla was let go from his job because he donated $1,000 several years ago to support a proposition in California that passed by a majority of the voters, and he was later vilified because he donated money to them. Now, agree or disagree with the group to whom he donated his money, but the fact that that was disclosed cost the CEO his job when 9 million people in California voted for the referendum that he supported. So I think it's a double-edged sword. When we talk about disclosure laws, and especially when we talk about not-for-profit organizations, I think they have an obligation to the people who donate to them, but I don't think that obligation is necessarily to disclose every dime that they spend for everybody they spend it for, because I'm not sure that serves the purpose that it's intended to serve.
To me, this question goes back to the Citizens United decision that a corporation has freedom of speech and can spend on elections as they so please. And I disagree with that. I think that money being spent on elections is getting really out of hand, and the voter has a right to know who's spending the money on what advertisement, so they have an idea of where that money is coming from. Illinois has taken steps to improve disclosure. If you get a donation of more than $1,000, you are required to report where that donation came from. So citizens could look at that information to find out who is financing somebody's campaign. And I really think this is important for us to know because we need to know where all the money is coming from, because somebody, a corporation or a not-for-profit, shouldn't have a louder voice than the average citizen when it comes to donating to a campaign and have their voices heard.
Thank you. Ms. Fine, do you believe charter schools have a place in this district? Would you comment on House Bill 3754, which abolishes the State Charter School Commission and transfers all the powers and business to the State Board of Education?
In our district, we have perfectly good public schools. Actually, we have excellent public schools. People move here for our school districts. So I think we would be very hard pressed to open a charter school within this district. That's not the case around the state. There are places throughout Illinois that the public school systems thrive because of the charter schools that they do have in place. Charters give teachers the opportunity to think outside of the box and try to find a creative way to teach our students. That being said, we have charter schools that overperform neighborhood public schools, that perform on the same level, and also underperform. When it comes to the Charter School Commission, I really think that that job can be left in the hands of ISB. because of the fact that right now ISB can go to different places throughout the state and say, hey, you know, your school board's not working, we're going to take that over to you, for you. So if a charter school wants to open in an area and that school board says, no, we don't think we want you to open here, that charter can then go to ISB and ISB can decide if that's best for that community.
I'm a little surprised to hear my opponent say that she supports the expansion of charter schools because she's voted against it on several occasions. She voted against the expansion of charter schools that include a digital component. Harvard confers degrees to students who take classes online. I don't understand what the objection is to finding an outstanding teacher and giving him or her a chance to reach thousands of students instead of dozens of students. Abolishing the Charter School Commission puts the decision of whether there's going to be competition back into the hands of the competitor. And to me, that doesn't really make sense. I think a Charter School Commission can serve the purpose of deciding whether a charter school should be established, but in the end, the charter school has to justify itself. If it doesn't do what it said it will do, it will close because parents won't send their students there. We need to work on creating more choices for our parents, not fewer choices for our parents. And when we permit the expansion of charter schools across the state in places where the public schools are failing the students, we're offering our parents a chance to give their children a chance. 66% of students in the state of Illinois, fourth grade students, don't read at grade level. Something is broken. And if charter schools and competition give us a chance to fix that broken system, then we would be terribly remiss not giving those parents that opportunity.
Thank you. Next question is directed to Ms. Myalls. As a result of court action, the Illinois term limits for legislators amendment, which would have limited terms for legislators to 8 years, is not on the November 4th ballot. Do you support term limits for Illinois legislatures, and why or why not?
I support term limits 100%. I was terribly disappointed that anybody fought that, since 600,000 citizens in Illinois signed a petition asking that that be heard. The second disappointment came when our legislators, my opponent included, decided to put several referenda on the ballot and not that one. What we are going to have a chance to vote on are things that are non-binding, but they decided not to ask voters the question that the voters said they wanted to be asked, which was, can we limit our legislators? There's no place for career legislators. We are not supposed to be making careers for people to go service in Springfield. These are effectively part-time jobs in Springfield, and that's not to take away from the service of the people who are there, but corruption is fed by people who end up in the system for 30 and 40 years. Corruption is fed by people who are there for 10 years because they become more interested in getting reelected than they are interested in representing their constituents. And to me, it's astounding that the citizens in Illinois aren't having a chance to be heard on something that more than 500 million of us said we wanted to be heard on.
I believe the issue of term limits is in the hands of the voters. If the voter is not happy with their representative, that constituency would vote that representative out of office. It was the courts that decided that that term limit legislation was not suited to be on the ballot. There was more in that legislation than just term limits. There was changing the size of the legislature and many other things as well. And the court ruled it unconstitutional and they could not put it on the ballot. When it does come to term limits, I'm all in favor of term limits for leadership. I think that's very important. I think the leaders in the state need to change over and we need to have fresh blood, so to speak, at the top. But when it comes to the legislature, I know when I came in 2 years ago, there were 30 of us that were new. And most people who are in the legislature stay there for maybe 6, 8, some 10 years. And there's very few people who stay much longer than that.
Thank you. And the next question goes to you. Illinois was the last state to pass a concealed carry law. It allows a properly licensed individual to carry a concealed loaded or unloaded handgun in his or her person or car. Do you support the new law? And if not, how would you recommend amending it?
Yeah, concealed carry did pass in the state of Illinois. If you look at my voting record, I am very concerned that we have the strictest safety measures put in place for the residents of the state. And there are some parts of the legislation that I would like to see amended or changed. For example, right now, any place that you walk into that does not want to allow guns has a no gun sign. And that's a great concern to me because those signs are on our schools. And we have a school in our district that serves children with disabilities. And I went to their school and noticed, I said to the principal, I'm like, you don't have the sign up. And she said, I can't put it up because it upsets my kids too much when they come to school to see that sign on the window. And this is something that we need to address. Also, part of that legislation says that if you have an establishment that less than 50% of your sales go to alcohol, then you can't allow concealed weapons in your establishment. To me, that it doesn't make sense because people can go in there and still drink to an excess, even though 50% of their sales do not go to alcohol, and carrying a concealed weapon in that case, I just don't think is the safest idea. So I really think that we need to look at the law that's in place and find out how we can make it a safer issue for the residents of Illinois while allowing people to abide by the law.
I support the concealed carry law. I think the Supreme Court has told Illinois that we needed to pass it. That being said, we obviously still have to address the question of gun violence in our state, and I would support reaching across the aisle to talk about sensible legislation that's addressed at reducing gun crime and not specifically addressed to, what the Supreme Court has told us we can't do constitutionally. I think, though, that when you start to talk about can you carry guns into any place where alcohol is served, you start to run into a very, very fuzzy area because alcohol is served in most homes, but I don't think anybody would suggest that we're no longer allowed to have a gun in our home, for example. So I think when we pass laws directed at gun crimes, we need to be sure that those laws are enforced. We need to be sure that they're enforced rigorously, and we need to be sure that people who have committed those crimes are punished appropriately, because that's the way we're going to reduce gun violence overall.
Thank you. Ms. Myalls. Okay, and now we will go to our closing statements, which are 2 minutes long, and we are going to start with Ms. Myalls.
Thank you. First, I want to thank you all again for sitting here and listening to some pretty dry stuff at times, but things that are important to all of us, so thank you for being here. When my opponent ran a couple of years ago, she talked about 4 things. The first thing she said was she wanted to cut legislative pay 10%. She didn't sponsor or co-sponsor any bills to do that. There was a bill proposed. She didn't even help move it out of committee to get it a hearing. But she did get a 4.6% raise herself, as did all of her colleagues in Springfield, and she voted for that. Our legislators are already among the highest paid. It costs the taxpayers $180,000 per legislator on average per year, $81,000 average salary, and $99,000 to contribute to their pensions. I think a raise under those circumstances was inexcusable. I would waive my right to a pension if I went to Springfield. She also said she wanted to ban political contributions from those who lobby state government, but she took $144,000 from PACs and lobbyists since she started running. She said she would be independent of Mike Madigan, and she's taken the position today that she thinks the leadership should be changed, but her first vote when she got elected was to make Mike Madigan the speaker again. She also accepted $113,000 from the Democratic Party, and Mike Madigan is the chairman of that party. And finally, she said she would work for pension reform, but the pension reform bill that was passed will only take us backwards to 2011, when we had to hike our income tax to 67%. That's the best case. She hasn't addressed serious reform, and that's not really a surprise because she's accepted a lot of donations from the union bosses and special interests who benefit from the current structure. Someone needs to represent taxpayers in those discussions. Taxpayers need to be at that table, and we need to move forward miles away, if you will, from where we are right now. A vote for my opponent is a vote for the status quo. If you think we're doing okay, you should vote for her again. Thanks so much for being here and for listening.
Again, I'd like to thank the League and everybody here for joining us today. I do want to clear up some misconceptions because there have been mailers that have gone out about this quote-unquote $3,100 pay increase. That was constitutionally mandated. When the state legislature set our pay scale, we voted to take 12 unpaid furlough days, and that added up to $3,100. The court ruled that that was unconstitutional when the governor was sued by the president of the Senate and the Speaker of the House when he refused to pay us. They said you cannot change legislative pay during a session, and we had to reinstitute the $3,100. So that was by no means a pay raise. As far as Illinois, our employment rate is at its lowest point in 5 years since the recession. We've added 9,000 new businesses and 257,000 new jobs. As far as people moving out of the state, there was just a study that came out that said more people are moving into the city of Chicago than any metropolitan area in this country. So I'm just looking at the facts and I'm seeing them a bit different than my opponent. I'm proud to represent our district in Springfield. I feel that we set the example for a community when it comes to involvement and interest in the state. And I look forward to continuing to work with my constituents and moving the state forward. Thank you for having us today.
So you said that at the end. You said in closing, if people are satisfied with the status quo, vote for your opponent, Laura Fine. If they want to change things, I think I'm paraphrasing, but I think that's what you said. If they want change, they should vote for Kathy Myalls. Did I get that right?
Yeah, absolutely, that's right. A vote for Laura is a vote for Mike Madigan again. And I think we have seen that that's not what's best for the state. If people are happy with where we are, then I don't think I'm the right candidate because I would want to change things and I would want to start turning us into a better direction.
So if you had to say one or two things that would motivate, you think, the voters in your district, the 17th State House District, to come out and vote, what would those one or two things be?
I think we've already borne a heavy enough tax burden, and I think we're all concerned about how our schools are doing. I think what we really need to focus on right now, though, is trying to recreate jobs here. And I think that if people don't vote for structural change, if people don't vote to take away some of the Madigan supermajority, there's never going to be change in this state. But changing one legislator in Illinois takes us out of the superminority, gives us a chance to work with what I hope will be a Governor Rauner to produce some legislation where both parties represent the people of Illinois and not just the Democrats.
That is, the increase to 5% would be rolled back in January of 2015 if nothing is done by the legislature to 3.75%. You're saying you oppose that and you want to keep it at 5%?
No, what I'm saying is we need to see what's out there. We need to see what's brought to the state legislature. My fear is if it immediately comes back, we're going to lose $2 billion the first year, $4 billion the year after that. And that's going to affect our services. That's going to affect the money that we give to education. That's going to affect the money that we give to human services. And people are really going to feel it. As much as, even my opponent pointed out, some of our services we fund at the lowest level of any state. And by taking this funding away as well, it's going to put them into a turmoil.
So does that mean you don't favor the decrease to 3.75%?
What I favor is a responsible decrease of the tax. We can see what other states have done, and what we have seen successful is, for example, in Missouri, they have economic indicators, and what these say is when our jobless rate hits this point, when our economy hits this point, then we can start rolling back our income tax, and they've actually done it. And I think that's just a more responsible way of doing it, rather than pulling the carpet out from under us, saying that we can do it in a slower, more determined fashion to make sure that we stay on the right path while still providing that tax relief.